My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds, they're geeks, entertainment, culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Pound. Nerds and geeks come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and DC. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals flip it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, Mega Christmas, Strangers franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And even though it's not the best microscope in the world, we are giving it our all, and we hope it's still entertaining.
I don't know if I like what you're implying there, Beeper, but this is sort of a sequel to last week's episode where we kind of broke down all of the Spider-Man movies that have come out up until now. And now that you have seen Spider-Man No Way Home, we can actually have a more interesting conversation about that film. But before that, let's just say Merry Christmas. This episode will be coming out a few days after Christmas Day has passed. And as Catholics, we believe in the Christmas liturgical season that goes on for like 12 days or so. So it's still appropriate to say Merry Christmas. So Beeper, Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas indeed.
Joyeux Noël, as you would say en français.
Feliz Navidad.
That's about it.
You would say in Spanish.
Sí, señor.
I just know how to say. Well.
So you guys, this is your first Christmas with a little baby, a little Jam Jam as a...
Oh, yes. She's getting lots of presents from everybody.
Are there any? I know you're not really big into Christmas tradition type stuff, but have you guys like thought of anything you want to like start doing now that you have kids?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm not big into Christmas tradition, just not the same as most people are.
Right. Sorry.
But I don't know. We actually, unfortunately, were not able to do one of the main ones that I want to do because we had to sign up for Mass, and I did it a little too late because I didn't think many people wanted to go to midnight Mass. But apparently enough people did, and so we're not going to midnight Mass, which makes me sad because I think it's honestly only the second or third Christmas in my life that I will not have gone to Christmas Mass on the evening past 10 o'clock.
Wow.
Yeah, it's something my family used to do, but we're still going to do a réveillon, have food late on December 24th, and have fun with that.
I've never been to a midnight Mass.
Well, yeah, that's the one tradition I kind of wanted to do, and we'll do something at least similar-ish. And, of course, we'll watch Lord of the Rings. So, if those are the only two Christmas traditions I keep, then I'm pretty okay with it.
There you go. Well, hopefully Santa's good to you and to Jam Jam and to Mjolnir and to everyone who listens. Hopefully you guys are able to have a Merry Christmas. I think everyone was kind of hoping that everything with COVID would be calmed down by now, but with Omicron kind of rearing its head in the last month, it's at least where I live, it's led to a lot more restrictions, and people are pretty bummed about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting out here. We have more restrictions, but it's more restrictions on public events and less on private ones. So we'll see how that ends up going. But right now it means that we can still go see my parents and my brother and hang out. So I'm pretty happy about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anyway, let's keep the Christmas spirit train rolling by talking about Spider-Man. We talked about him, of course, in great length last week, and his third this is confusing. It's the third. No, it's the second. It's the third Spider-Man movie, but I guess because the second series didn't have a third movie, it's technically only the second Spider-Man 3.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is it better to say it's the third Spider-Man 3 or the second?
I think it is the third Tom Holland Spider-Man movie.
That is fair.
The best way to say it.
Yes.
Because, I mean, which is kind of funny, though, because I feel like the first trilogy usually isn't referred to as the Tobey Maguire. It's usually referred to as the Sam Raimi. But then the second one usually is the Andrew Garfield. And now this one, I feel like, is either going to be the MCU or the...
Tom Holland.
But I'm not sure which one. Probably MCU, though.
I mean, John Watts, who's directed this new trilogy, he's also going to be working on the MCU's Fantastic Four movie. So I think he has a name for himself, but you're right to say...
I think it's more that, like, Sam Raimi was big before... Like, you know what I mean? Like, Sam Raimi was big before Spider-Man. Like, he had done a few things, whereas, like, you know, most of the people working on Amazing Spider-Man were fairly new to it, including the main actor, and it kind of made his career. So I feel like people tend to be more like... Because I don't think Spider-Man really made Tobey Maguire's career. Like, he had done things before and has done things since that work.
I mean, he hasn't done a whole lot since Spider-Man 3.
I mean, he's done some character actor work and some other movies. He's done the movie about the based on the book there with Leo.
Oh yes, The Great Gatsby. But even that was like 2014 or something.
Well, yeah, but that was still. But he had also done things before. Like Andrew Garfield really, like, you know, Spider-Man and Silence were the two big things he did, and it was in that order.
Fair enough. So yes, Spider-Man.
And Tom Holland is doing Far Cry, which
he's doing Uncharted.
Uncharted, sorry. I always get those two mixed up.
Yeah, so Spider-Man No Way Home is the third film in the series directed by John Watts, starring Tom Holland as Spider-Man. It is a co-production between Marvel Studios and Sony Pictures. So last week and many times in the past, we've discussed about the kind of interesting relationship between Sony and Marvel, how Spider-Man is Marvel's most popular character, but Sony kind of has the rights to making movies about him. And thankfully, since 2015, they've kind of agreed to work with Marvel Studios to make Spider-Man movies. And if anything, the response to this film, I think, is just an affirmation that this needs to continue happening, because less than a week after it's been released, like we're recording ahead of time before Christmas happens, at this point, it's already the highest grossing film of the year domestically by over $100 million. And it's the fourth highest grossing film of the year globally. Only one movie made in North America, or rather by an American studio, has made more money than it, being No Time to Die. So clearly, people were interested in this and people want to see Spider-Man movies done well. And I'm sure by the end of it, this is going to be the most profitable Spider-Man movie that's ever come out. And it's just crazy for me to think about that. There's a global pandemic going on.
Profitable with inflation.
Okay, sure, but when we're adjusting for inflation, that changes all looking at box office numbers.
No, I know. But it might actually be, because I feel like it'll hit more of a public than others did. So it might still get that.
Yeah, it could be the first movie of 2021, or even, like, no movie in 2020 obviously hit $1 billion, but it could be the first one of this year to get to $1 billion. It might even actually somehow reach it before the calendar year is up.
Yeah, that'd be pretty impressive.
Just makes me so happy. Like when I went and saw the movie on the Thursday night at a 10:30 showing, and pretty much every seat was filled.
Yeah, we went to see it like Tuesday at noon, and it was pretty much full. Still,
Like, as a Spider-Man fan, this makes me so happy that, and this brings up a question I actually don't know, because we've established that the MCU has like this core base of hardcore fans who will show up for anything. So you look at movies like Shang-Chi or Eternals or Black Widow, these other Marvel movies that came out this year, none of them have done near this well. So my thinking is, it's clearly not just the hardcore Marvel fan base that is making this movie a success. There's obviously, I guess, a contingent of just ordinary moviegoers that decided this is the movie worth seeing, or there's this kind of holdover of older Spider-Man fans who liked either the Sam Raimi or the Mark Webb movies, but haven't enjoyed the MCU that, I don't know, came back for this.
I mean, I think there definitely has been a bit of that because, like, I don't want to get into spoilers necessarily, but like, you know, it was a big deal that Vic Mignogna Alfred Molina came back. Bad slip, sorry. And you know, and Willem Dafoe as well. Like they are, you know, very popular. I think much more than like, you know, I don't think that many people came back for Electro or Lizard, but still, Jamie Foxx is pretty popular, so who knows?
Yeah, so we're going to try and talk about this movie without spoiling things. And this is a lot like Avengers Endgame in that you would think, oh, the trailers show a lot. There is a lot in this movie that is not in the trailers, and there is a lot of spoilery content that I would highly recommend seeing the film before looking at any news articles or listening to the Spoilerverse section of this podcast. So how I'm going to define what's a spoiler: anything that is in one of the trailers is fair game to discuss without it being a spoiler. So we're going to, again, talk as much as we can about non-spoilery things before we move on to actually talking about spoilers. But admittedly, because there is so much that is spoilery, we're going to be spending a lot of time in the spoilerverse. So this spoiler-free section will be a shorter chunk of time. There'll be a time code in the description as always. But please, if you have not seen the movie, I realize that things are kind of scary out there. But I felt safe at the movie theater I was at, and I think it's worth seeing. I have no idea how long it'll be in theaters before it's available to rent digitally. So I would certainly encourage people to go see it.
Yeah, I would second that. It was a good experience to go see in the theaters, for sure.
So Beeper, give us the Blu-ray case description for Spider-Man: No Way Home.
Ever since I got bit by that spider, I've only had 1 week where my life has felt normal. That was when you found out.
Peter?
That spell that you botched, it started pulling in visitors from every universe.
What's happening?
They're starting to come through, and I can't stop them.
Spider-Man: No Way Home.
When you're thinking, hey, I'm about to do something that could break the universe, run it by us next time.
In theaters, December 17th.
In a world where everybody knows that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, that's not a spoiler, that was in the previous movie, life sucks for Peter Parker. And it kind of sucks for the people who are directly associated with him. So he asked Doctor Strange to make people forget that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. And because Doctor Strange is full of himself, it backfires, and then the plot kind of becomes irrelevant, and it becomes all fan service.
Hey, that's not true. How dare you?
I can okay, no, that's not true. And then the spell backfires, leading to some people from different universes to show up. And then when it's time to fix it, the plot stops making any sense, and it's all fan service. Which I say as if it's a negative, but it isn't necessarily.
I would like to.
But you asked for a plot. You asked for a plot summary, and there isn't much of a plot past that point in the movie. Also, it's a good way to avoid spoilers.
All right. So yes, you're touching on this topic of fan service. The trailer shows that villains from the previous Spider-Man franchises, played by their original actors, come back for this movie.
Mm-hmm. And it's glorious.
Yeah, it is incredible. Like, I never would have thought I would see Alfred Molina or Willem Dafoe or even Rhys Ifans back playing these parts.
Yeah. The first two were, I mean, yeah. That's not a spoiler saying that Alfred Molina and Willem Dafoe definitely were a better comeback to their roles.
Well, even just to see them together, right? Because even though
that was pretty nice.
To me as a fan of all these movies to varying degrees, just the very fact that like even when it was announced that these actors were coming back, there was a lot of question of, well, their characters die, like how do they come back? Are they playing like a variant of them from a different universe that just happens to look like the one from the movie we saw before?
Oh yeah, once again the MCU doesn't know how it's going to do multiverses and doesn't care about anything remotely having continuity or being intelligent.
Wow, you are really you're turning into a real Scrooge here this episode.
Look, I enjoyed the movie, and I think it's got a lot of really strong points, and I don't think that most of the criticism I have were immersion breaking in any way, but like there were a lot of things that didn't make sense in this movie. And that's why I made the joke at the beginning. Like, there's a lot of weird stuff in this movie that doesn't make any sense, but it is still, like, performances make up for it completely. But,
no,
like...
and I know it's
not... And that's not necessarily a criticism of this movie, the last one I made. That's a criticism of the MCU. Like, they've had, like, 5 different types of time traveling and alternate realities so far, and none of them are coherent with each other. Like, that's not on this movie. That's on Marvel to, like, get better at writing.
Well, so the idea of variants as they are in the Loki series, like you could easily say that the villains that show up in this movie are just variants. They're from different timelines.
Except, yes and no. See, yes, you could. Because we're not here to analyze the problems with the variants in Loki and that whole system. We talked about it a little bit, but it got worse. Retroactively because of other things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah, the logic of Loki got worse because of this movie.
Well, and
it's likely to get worse as it goes on.
Well, and like people have said, like, oh, like, do I have to have watched all these Disney Plus shows to understand what happens in Spider-Man? No, I don't think so. And unfortunately, I did.
But you may have had to watch the previous Spider-Man movies.
Yes, obviously. Well, okay. When you say the previous Spider-Man movies, you mean not just the Tom Holland ones, but the older movies as well.
Yes. Actually, I think you could get away with maybe not watching the Amazing Spider-Man ones.
I think you get away without watching the original ones either. They do,
kind of.
They do enough to explain where these characters come from, and
that's true.
And so this, going back to what I was trying to say in the beginning here, these are indeed the exact same characters from the original movies, and the amount of work that's put into kind of, basically like maintain the continuity of those separate universes in this movie with all the way that they reference the different worlds. I was very impressed. I'm like, yeah, there's one glaring kind of continuity error that kind of stood out to me after the fact. But for the most part,
yes, I think I know what you're talking about.
There are a lot of, it's fairly coherent. The fact that the way that the different characters kind of relate to events that happened in their universes.
Yeah, it is. It just then causes a problem later on.
Yeah, and you and other people, and even myself, have said, like, yeah, the movie's not perfect, but it's
fun and it's good.
I was so invested in it the entire time that nothing happened really, like, I guess, like you said, it didn't. My immersion was not broken. I wasn't taken out of it, and I'm very forgiving, I suppose, in that respect.
Yeah, but I'm less so. Like, I think I'm less so for movies generally, and like there were a lot of things that almost immediately after I was like, oh yeah, that was kind of a not ideal, but it wasn't bad at any point. And I think that's the main thing, is that like this still worked as a movie very well, and I left the theater enjoying it. And it left a good taste in my mouth.
Yeah, so all these actors coming back to play villains, even the ones that are less fondly remembered, I think they did an excellent job. It's felt seamless almost, as if no time had passed since they had last played their roles.
Especially, we can talk about this, the de-aging on Alfred Molina was actually really good. Like, it was subtle enough to not be jarring, but still was done very well. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
We're getting better at that de-aging technology, but that was a good example of it, and it worked even like in the well-lit scenes, which I also appreciate. They didn't just keep Alfred Molina in the dark for the entire movie.
And again, comparing this to Loki, where they tried to do multiverse stuff, this works a lot better because the
multiverse already exists.
Yeah, like the characters that we're seeing being brought in from other universes, we've seen their stories play out before. And even if you haven't seen those other movies, they kind of, there's enough lived history there, and it's like there's so much extra, I suppose, for the fans. Like, for example, in Spider-Man 2 with Alfred Molina and Tobey Maguire, it's established that Dr. Kurt Connors and Dr. Otto Octavius are friends. And so in this movie, when the Lizard from the Amazing Spider-Man movies is on screen and they refer to him as Dr. Connors, Dr. Octopus actually has a reaction. He's like, Connors? And I'm like, that's a deep cut reference that only people who have seen Spider-Man 2 and remember that detail about his character would pick up on.
Yeah. I mean, but at the same time, Doc Ock also kind of knew a lot of people in the scientific community. So even if you didn't know it was a deep cut, it wasn't jarring, which I think, and here I will say positive things about this movie. I think a lot of the fan service was subtle enough that it wasn't jarring.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like, why are they, this isn't a spoiler. The thing you said just before we started the podcast, I'm a bit of a scientist myself, it wasn't jarring because it made sense for Norman Osborn to say that, right? It not just because it's something he said in the other movie, but just because it made sense in the context for him to say those words, right? Because he is a bit of a scientist, and they were talking about doing science things.
Totally. Now, I want to also give a shout out to Tom Holland, because his performance in this movie, like he's all over the place in terms of the emotions he has to portray, because Peter Parker has a lot happen to him in this movie, and I thought he did an excellent job.
He did,
going through the whole gamut. He was like George Bailey, Jimmy Stewart level of like range of emotions he had to express.
Yeah, no, he did very well. And another positive I'm going to say, I don't know if it's necessarily in the performance, because I think it's mostly in the writing, but MJ felt much better than she has in previous movies.
Totally. Zendaya.
Like they grounded, Zendaya's character, they grounded her. And this I'm stealing from Mjolnir, but since she's still sleeping, she talked about like kind of the importance of seeing her in her crappy job. And like, because she does have this kind of like slightly negative sense of humor in the MCU, which makes sense with her character, but you don't really get to see why it makes sense with her character until this movie. But in this movie, like, and this is still not really spoiler, they talk about going to MIT, and she's immediately saying things like, she doesn't say it in so many words, but like she absolutely needs to get a full scholarship if she wants to make it into MIT, right? She needs and she is kind of just this kid from New York who is really smart, but who is not, doesn't have the means to go to big schools, who's stuck in this terrible dead-end job working at a coffee shop, who's like, her life isn't great, and it kind of informs the bad sense of humor she'd had, which, like, until then, you'd just kind of seen her at this genius school, which, didn't necessarily, because you didn't see her outside of it, it didn't really drive home the point that, oh yeah, no, she's also here on a scholarship, and this is not what her life would be like, if that makes sense.
This is like, something, yeah. I mean,
yeah, like, Have you ever seen Gilmore Girls?
I have started watching Gilmore Girls very recently.
Oh, okay. Well, so basically, that's the thing. Like the basic premise is that Rory needs to get her scholarship to go to the fancy high school, but like it wouldn't matter if you didn't see the rest of her life, right? It would just, if all you saw was her at high school, and then people were like, oh, she's on a scholarship, and they don't even mention it for Zendaya's character in the movie, so like you don't really get that. You don't feel bad for her, but when you see the rest of her life and you see what the rest of it implies and why she needs the scholarship and kind of the strings attached to it, it makes it gives her an emotional core, and you care about her beyond just the fact that she's the main character. And I think, again, that's something they're kind of doing with Zendaya's MJ, is they're actually grounding her and giving her reasons to be who she is, and making her work better as a character. Also, like, I think generally the writing was much better for the way she spoke in this movie than it was in previous movies.
There is a real theme that I picked up on in regards to the dignity of the human person in this film. Particularly as it relates to the villains.
Yes. I see what you mean, but I also think there's a caveat to that, but that goes into spoilers a little bit.
Yeah, we can pick it up there. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but like I see what you mean, and I agree that generally there is, but there's also something that kind of, it could have been better expressed than it was, and it would have worked better. But I think it definitely still is there, and it still works, but it could have been better.
Doctor Strange is in this movie a fair bit. I kind of assumed he was just going to have, I guess, an extended cameo like he did in Thor Ragnarok, but he's a significant part of the movie, and I know people were concerned about him just being the next mentor for Spider-Man, and he's not. He does not serve that role in the movie at all.
No, it was, and they managed to Professor X him in a subtle enough way that still made sense, which I think was good. And I think, for better or for worse, this movie is kind of, we talked about Tom Holland, but I think this movie does respond pretty strongly to a lot of the criticisms that were built around Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Like the concept of him as being a mini Iron Man, all the problems a lot of people have with him were kind of addressed. And, when we talk about spoilers, we'll get about how that definitely by the end of the movie was true. But I think that it was very intentional to keep Doctor Strange's part like smaller, in the sense of like he's not directly interfering with what Spider-Man is doing, and then when he tries, it doesn't fully work, and he's out for a good chunk of the movie in a way that made sense, and that actually did the opposite of him being the mentor. It actually built up,
you can almost say he's the antagonist of the movie in a way.
I mean, a little bit. He's the antagonist of the first act, for sure. But I don't think we can take that away from Willem Dafoe.
Well, fully. Okay, let's just get into the spoilerverse, because I'm dying here. I want to talk about more specific things.
So. All right. Yeah, I mean, we could. I guess we could, without spoiling, without the big spoilers per se. We do see Doctor Strange fighting Peter Parker, so like we can't say that. Yeah, he wasn't a mentor figure. Yeah, he was an antagonist, and they'd end up fighting and being ideologically opposed. Not also, which I think was good. Not just like the reason why they stopped, why Peter Parker went against what he was doing wasn't just because, he was being a dumb teenager. There was like there was real stake in the conflict between them, which I think was really good, and is something that has been sometimes lacking in the MCU.
Totally. So we're going to go inside the spoilerverse now. You can skip around this part of the discussion if you want to just hear our final thoughts. Here we go. Hold on to your butts. Let's go back to just very, because we were just talking about the dignity of the human person. So there's this whole Doctor Strange wants all the villains to be sent back to where they came from. And it's sort of Aunt May that sort of champions the cause of saying, like, if these people are all going to die, if you send them back and there's a way you can help them, you should try and help them. And considering they're all supposed to be like super villains and they're all bad guys, I thought it was quite meaningful that they were trying to say, like, no, like, these are still people, even though some of them look like monsters, they're still people. And
and it's a very Spider-Man thing to do.
Yeah, and like the world of the MCU does have advanced technology that those other universes wouldn't have. So they probably, as we discover throughout the course of the film, there are methods of helping them. And you're right, that sort of overtakes the plot. Like the whole Spider-Man's identity is revealed. That really kind of stops being important, and it becomes more about kind of like therapy and R&D for helping the villains out.
Yeah. And this is where, like, this is a criticism that, like, I know Mjolnir made, and I think is very fair. It's unfortunate, though, that they didn't, for that theme especially, that they didn't show the villains reappearing in their universe. Because it kind of, like, not massively, but just very slightly undercuts the fact,
because they're all healed up. Like none of them have have the powers anymore when they go back.
Yeah, so that's part of it. But the other part of it, and that's why I said, like, the plot kind of stops happening. At no point do they consider that since these men were a second away from their death anyway, they might not be able to avoid it even if they're cured. Like, and so by not having that payoff of seeing it, you could be like, yeah, you just sent good men to die instead of having evil men die for their mistakes, which is still, like, which is very morally ambiguous.
Right, because we don't know the exact moments.
I mean, they do talk about it. Like, I think, like, Alfred Molina was choking out Peter Parker. So, like, Doc Ock was choking out Peter Parker, and so, it's just before he gets knocked into the river. But we don't know exactly how close it was, and yeah, he could have, maybe the momentum was already going and he was falling into the river. They never mention where Green Goblin was at. But, and that one's a little harder to tell, just because generally I think, like, because it was definitely the Green Goblin, not Norman Osborn, fully in charge at that point, it's a little bit harder to kind of tell what was happening.
So the way that they massage, like, the trailers make it seem like, oh, they do the spell that makes people forget that he's Spider-Man, and then they break open the multiverse doing the spell, and that's while the villains are showing up. But I thought it was very clever how they actually, within the movie, that's not what happens. They stop the spell from happening, and that's why these, like, people are, like, kind of like leaking in.
Well, it's because they stop the spell before it fully takes action, but they don't fully, like, right? Because or in the spoilerverse, the spell ends up being that, like, it's bringing to the universe all the people who know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, rather than making people forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and that's why you're getting villains who do know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and and why it's a big like, they had to stop it, because otherwise you're getting everybody from every dimension who knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and that would be a big problem.
Yeah, and this is where, like, the one, I guess,
the one big problem,
is Electro, because from my recollection of having watched Amazing Spider-Man 2, he never learns that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Well, I'm pretty sure that, like, because there's the nice, like, Miles Morales mention at the end, right, when, like, Electro's,
I thought you'd be black.
Yeah, Electro's talking to Spider-Man, and he's like, I thought, yeah, you were poor kids from Queens. I thought you'd be black, and you think there's one out there who is, and that was, that was cute. And I think it worked. And I guess I just spoiled that. We're in the spoilerverse. You want to talk about it?
So, after 1,000 and million rumors and premature confirmation, not really sure, we finally saw the return of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield as their respective Spider-Man in this movie.
To literally nobody's surprise. Here's a thing about the spoilers for this movie. I feel like all the spoilers that Disney was trying to keep from being spoiled were either irrelevant or people knew about it anyway.
Well, yes, but at the same time, there was
Like, I feel like,
there was still
yeah.
a part of me that thought maybe it isn't happening. Maybe they're, or if they aren't, maybe they're in it for like 10 seconds.
Yeah, no, like, I guess that part of it is relevant, that they weren't, it wasn't just a random cameo, and also they didn't phone it in. Like, that was nice to see, but like, I don't know about you, but people started cheering and clapping in the theaters when both Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire showed up.
Oh yeah, I was
Oh,
like,
God,
I'm like,
why
calm
would people
down, I
do
can't hear what
that?
they're saying.
I know, I just, I got really angry at that, but
People are excited. I don't fault them for that. And that just makes
I
the
do.
movie.
You're watching a movie. You don't clap during a movie.
Well, clearly you didn't see Avengers Endgame because there were lots of people clapping during that movie.
I didn't. I'm very happy now that I didn't, because I would have gotten very upset.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Anyway, so they're in the movie, and they're in the movie for a fair bit. Like the third,
Yeah.
this does kind of like feel like three separate movies. It's like the first third is the Spider-Man versus Doctor Strange memory. My life sucks because my identity is exposed, and then the second part is like villain therapy, basically. Yeah. And then the third part is live action Spider-Verse.
Yeah, somewhat. All right. Well, since we've gotten into this, though, can I just say something? Like, yes, Tom Holland was great, but oh my gosh, Andrew Garfield killed it, right? Like, he was by far the better Spider-Man, and arguably probably the better Peter Parker too. Like, every scene he was in worked really well, and he was, I don't know, it did make me actively sad that he didn't get a third movie, even though I totally understand why, and the production of the second movie didn't deserve a third one. He definitely does.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I don't know. I think Tom Holland still had more to do. So holistically, I would say he had a better performance. But yes, Andrew Garfield.
I don't know. I feel like maybe, but Andrew Garfield, like you were talking about, like hitting all the emotional beats, he did that in less time, and I think slightly better, which is impressive. And like, Tobey Maguire flawlessly returned to the role and was a really good, not just he was really good at his version of Spider-Man, but also like, I think he played the I'm slightly older and more mature and have more experience with this than you guys really well, as like, without hammering it home, like just small things, like just the way he says I've been stabbed before, just such a, like, he said it in such like a matter of fact, almost flat way, but not like without, not without emotion, but just in the way that a guy who's been Spider-Man for a long time and who has gotten hurt and probably stabbed a lot of time, like, would say is like, yeah, no, this is part of my life.
Now, Grace Randolph, who I follow on YouTube, in her spoiler-free review of the movie, she said that part of the movie felt like an extended Saturday Night Live sketch. And I think she's referring to the scenes with the three Spider-Men. And I'll admit, for the most part, like, I never thought I'd see this in a movie. I never thought they'd actually get all these actors together in the same room playing like their versions of Spider-Man. But yeah, for like particularly like the scene in the lab, it did kind of feel like something you'd see on SNL.
I was directed to give this one hot take from Mjolnir before I go to the podcast, and that is that she actually really enjoyed those parts that a lot of people are making fun of her, saying, oh, it's just like a skit. And she's like, no, it was really good. They interacted really well, and she really enjoyed the kind of, like, the fact that they weren't just talking about the heavy stuff, or that they were kind of just interacting and having fun. And I think, again, it should have probably taken away from the movie, but it was done so well, and all of them just were so flawless in the role that it didn't.
Yeah, like and I agree. Like it felt like it went on maybe a little too long, but for the most part, I really enjoyed that scene because it showed them like the science in this movie. Like Spider-Man's
Yeah.
supposed to be a scientist, and
also I feel like, yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting you. Finish the science thing, but like,
well, just to say, to actually see like Tom Holland Peter trying to do the science to help the villains, and then the three of them working together to, create all the antidotes for the various
Yeah.
problems. I'm like, this is great.
Again, that one line, Tobey Maguire delivering these one lines really well. When he says that how long he'd been thinking about how to cure Norman Osborn, I think was just amazing. Like, it was subtle, but again, if you're a fan of the Sam Raimi movies, you know that like Norman Osborn was his father figure, right? Like, and it was a very stupid accidental death, and he really, really wanted to help him, and it had like, far-reaching consequences on his life, because it's also the reason he ended up having to kill, or not to kill, but like having to carry dead Harry in his arms as well, who was his best friend. Like,
that was so funny when Ned asks him
oh yeah,
this.
that was pretty hilarious.
But I would agree. This was a redemption for Andrew Garfield and for Jamie Foxx, who like, his version of Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2 was basically the Riddler from Batman Forever.
Yeah, I know, but it was also like kind of, that I did find a little bit jarring. It was like,
he still felt like the same character to me, even though he's got his glow up and he's got a way better outfit.
I did not feel like he was the same.
Really, because he still has that awkwardness and that like that craving for power. Like,
yeah, sometimes he felt like the same character, but like I feel like there were some scenes where he felt like the same character, but then other scenes where he just felt like a much better written version of the same character. And then others where I was just like, this is complete. Like, I feel like it wasn't a consistent characterization throughout.
Fair enough.
And I don't think that's Jamie Foxx's fault. I think that was the way that they used the character.
I liked how Sandman was in this movie, because when I saw him in the trailer, I'm like, why is he here? Like, he and his Peter Parker ended on good terms.
I mean, I don't like Sandman in the movie because he's kind of inconsistent and pointless. Like, why is he there? Not just because of the whole he and Peter Parker ended up on good terms, but also like, I mean, he's not there because all the scenes where he's human are taken directly from Spider-Man 3 and added, like,
sure, but he's
posted onto the movie.
He's doing the voice, like he's still in the movie. He's just
I did not actually know that it was him doing the voice, but like, I don't know, it just felt a little bit weird. Like, well, that was like the only thing that took me out of immersion, was like, it was a very obviously his scenes from Spider-Man 3 that were added inside the Statue of Liberty.
Right. I mean, then they did the same thing for Rhys Ifans, who played the Lizard, but it's been so long since I've seen those movies, I didn't really remember.
I watched the Sam Raimi trilogy fairly recently.
Right. People think it was a COVID thing that they like just couldn't get everyone actually on set. So
that's possible.
It's because they both played like the vocal performances in the movie.
Yeah.
Even though their characters are CGI for the most part. But I kind of liked how Sandman was there because he was different from the others. He was kind of like, he was just self-interested. He was like, I want to get back to my daughter. So he was always kind of just doing whatever he thought would get him back to his daughter fastest, whether that meant like going along with what Peter was saying or going along with what,
yeah, but was saying. Here's the thing. If he was listening, he would have known that technically the thing that would have gotten him to his daughter fastest was just pressing the button on that box. And he doesn't care about the other villains, so why would it matter?
Well, I think he's empathetic enough that he's reading the room and he's seeing like this kid is trying to help these people, so he's like willing to kind of like wait it out for the sake of trying to.
Yeah, but then why does he flip back afterwards? Like, it doesn't. He was a little inconsistent, is all.
Sure, it was consistent enough for me, and it made him different enough because again, the rest of them are basically full-on villains when we see them, and man, Willem Dafoe.
Oh God, he did not miss a beat.
He
can still make his voice change. Like, not even just his voice. Like, you can tell when he's Norman Osborn and when he's the Green Goblin just by his facial expression, like just his facial tics, which I think was really cool. Like, I don't think it took away from the Spidey sense, but like you could see it in his eyes when he was talking to Alfred, like to Doc Ock, just before, Tom Holland was able to Spidey sense the fact that he had gone evil again. You could tell, and it was subtle, but it subtle enough that it made sense that in universe nobody picked up on him, but like enough that I think I was like, oh yeah, no, he's Goblin right now. It's great.
Yeah, he was amazing. He it looks like he's barely aged at all in the last 20 years.
Yeah, but I mean, well, two things. First, I think they did originally age him up slightly when he was playing Norman Osborn.
Oh.
I'm not sure, but I think they did, because I'm thinking of other movies he was in around the same time, right? Like, specifically, I'm thinking about him in Boondock Saints, and I feel like he looked younger in that movie. So I think they might have just like slightly emphasized his wrinkles when he was Norman Osborn. I could be entirely wrong about that.
Came out like 5 years before Spider-Man did.
Did it? I thought it.
Okay, it was 3 years before.
Okay, yeah, but 3 years is not enough to make a difference, especially if there's that little difference after 20. Like, right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and making him the ultimate villain of the movie. I know I said like, oh, you could read the movie in a way that say that Doctor Strange is the antagonist because he's trying to prevent villain therapy from happening. But it is Green Goblin.
Well, yeah, let's put it in maybe a slightly better way. Doctor Strange may be the antagonist of the movie, but Green Goblin is the villain.
Right. And this is a good way to kind of tie in Aunt May's role in the movie.
Yeah, the actual spoiler that mattered. I think that's the only spoiler that actually mattered. All the other ones were either predictable.
I hadn't heard one iota about. Like, that was certainly they kept that secret.
Yeah, no. Well. So, I'll say it. They Uncle Ben'd Aunt May. And it was great. It worked. And I think it also... there's a slightly cynical part of me that says they probably did that in order to... shut up some of the people who say that, Spider-Man's character is about Uncle Ben's death, which kind of, but not necessarily. But they did, she said the thing, and then she died, and then he became fully Spider-Man by the end of the movie.
But it's also refreshing, I think, because so like she's kind of the catalyst behind the theme of the virtue. And initially, Peter's like, I don't want anything to do with this. I just want this to be over with. I want to be done with it. I want to move on with my life.
Yes.
And it made me realize that throughout all these movies, like, Tom Holland Spider-Man hasn't been as virtuous and selfless as we think Spider-Man to be. He's been kind of like, and she's been like, even in the last one, like, she's the one telling you should take your suit with you. You don't know what's going to happen when you're in.
Yeah, and I think that's also like some of the criticism that they say that he's just Iron Man Jr. I think is better. In the like, I don't think like it's a problem that he hung out with Iron Man, but I do think, like, in hindsight and looking at it now, that yes, the fact that his main motivation was impressing Tony Stark in some of the movies, like we talked about it last week, and I was like, nah, but now that I've seen him with better motivation, I'm like, oh yeah, no, there was definitely more truth to that than I realized.
My hope is, I had always thought that there was an Uncle Ben that died before we meet him in Civil War, because the way he's introduced there, it sort of hints at that something had happened, but they don't explicitly say it.
And like, whether or not the Uncle Ben dying is what made Aunt May the way she is, I think is irrelevant.
Sure.
Even though it's a nice headcanon to know that, she is living on Ben's legacy, and then Peter's also living on Uncle Ben's, like, her legacy is also Uncle Ben's legacy. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and what I really appreciate is that she doesn't regret her decisions, even after she's been fatally wounded.
Yeah,
she doesn't regret, like, trying to help the villains. I'm like, that is beautiful. That is virtuous.
That is Spider-Man. That, like, and I think, if we're talking about spoilers, like how they say that, like, I said, like, this Spider-Man is kind of fully Spider-Man. At the very end, So spoilers, but we're in the spoiler verse. Like at the very end, he fixes, like the spell is still escaping and people from the multiverse are still trying to come in, and he gets Doctor Strange to make everybody forget who Peter Parker is. And including MJ, and then at the end he goes to talk to MJ to try to because he says I'm gonna convince you that I'm me again and it's gonna be fine. But then he sees that she got injured, and then remembers that her life was shitty, and sees that she got into MIT without being associated with him, and he's like, you know what, she's better off without me, and just doesn't tell her. And that is a very Spider-Man thing to do. And then after that, he's also, a poor kid in an apartment. He doesn't have access to anything anymore because nobody knows who he is. Like, he doesn't have access to Stark Industries anymore, even though that would have been a really easy way to fix all the problems, because really you'd think Pepper Potts wouldn't have been able to get him into MIT. But like at the very end, and I'll let you talk about the thing you're probably most excited about, but he is, just Spider-Man.
Yes, and I think the way this movie ends puts to bed all the complaints that people would have about the MCU Spider-Man, about not feeling really like Spider-Man, because not only does he go through the death of Aunt May and learn the lesson about with great power comes great responsibility, but he also does a very selfless, heroic thing by essentially making everyone forget about him. And the fact that even amidst all that, and then he makes the hero sacrifice again, choosing to not to reconnect with MJ and Ned. And I just loved, seeing him in that little apartment, making a more homemade costume and just going out to be Spider-Man. I was like, this feels like real, authentic Spider-Man to me.
Yeah, I thought you were going to gush more about the costume.
Well, we didn't get to see very much of it. It was kind of like freeze frame or something, you only, what it did is it very cleverly got me very excited for whatever the next Spider-Man movie is going to be.
Fair enough. I feel like, and I feel, I heard this in one of Mjolnir's podcasts, but it sounds like it might have been done intentionally, that it is kind of halfway between, not halfway, but it does take beats from both Tobey Maguire's and Andrew Garfield's costume as well, as a kind of tribute to the guys who just helped him.
Yeah, and then
I didn't notice it personally, but apparently it was closer to those.
Yeah, it's the color scheme, at least from what you could see, kind of looked like it was more in line with theirs. And it's funny seeing them in their costumes. I realized, the Amazing Spider-Man 2 costume is actually not that different from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man costume.
Yeah, it's very blue and red. It's very not
the
as fancy,
different, of course, but
yeah.
My little nitpick with the Spider-Verse elements is that they used the theme music from the Amazing Spider-Man 1 instead of the theme music from the Amazing Spider-Man 2, because they actually changed composers and came up with a totally different music theme for Spider-Man in the second one.
Oh, but how great was it to hear Danny Elfman's music again?
Oh, it was amazing.
That
not
was
just his theme for Spider-Man, but even his Doc Ock and Green Goblin music.
Exactly.
Yes.
That was great. I loved it.
And people are going to compare this movie to Into the Spider-Verse naturally, because there's very similar beats. There's a Spider-Man who's learning from other Spider people, and there's that scene on the roof where they all kind of share about their losses and their and how they can relate to each other. I feel like it works better here than it does than Into the Spider-Verse, because again, we've seen those characters before. So when we hear Toby talk about losing Uncle Ben, or we hear about Andrew losing Gwen, it's like we saw that happen. If you've seen the other movie.
I mean, that's also where some people made this criticism, and I think it's only semi-fair, because who knows what they're going to do going forward. But they were complaining that this Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield only ever referred to things that happen in their movies, even though it's hard to tell exactly where Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man comes from, but it's obvious. They make a point to explain that Tobey Maguire's is from slightly in the future from Spider-Man 3,
right? And
I feel like it was a little weird that they, that when they're talking about the weirdest thing they fought, Carnage is. Venom is still probably the weirdest thing that Tobey Maguire has fought, but it was a little strange to just be oh, okay, that nothing else happened, especially like, and I guess it was kind of a meta joke that was being made for for Andrew
You're
Garfield. It was like,
amazing.
wow, you got, oh yeah, that. But I think it was more the thing where he's like, oh man, I'm so lame because yeah, no, everybody he's fought were kind of lamer versions of the ones that they fought, and he never fought an alien, and it was just like, yeah, couldn't you have just given him something? Be like, yeah, no, I fought, I don't know, just talk about him having fought a different version of the Vulture or something else. Like, give him something interesting.
Yeah, and I'm glad they got to the joke about the web shooters. Like that just had to had to happen.
Yeah. And again, they made it happen in a way that wasn't jarring, because it was like just slightly after they'd done their science experiments together, and it was like, oh yeah, no, these guys are, scientist nerds, and they would want to know about that.
Yeah, and even the logic behind why Tom Holland is the one leading the charge, because he's the only one from a universe where there's more superheroes around, and he's actually worked with other heroes. And I laughed so hard when they're like, "What are the Avengers? Like, are you in a band?"
Yeah, it was great, and yeah, and the I had forgotten about this, but Mjolnir reminded me of it. Like, the reason they make the joke about Tobey Maguire having a bad back is because he did almost wreck his back playing Spider-Man.
And even that, but also in Spider-Man 2, there's the scene where he's like trying to get his powers back, and he like jumps off the building, and he's like, I'm back, and then he falls on a car, and he's like, oh, my back.
Yeah. No, and again, it didn't feel jarring, and I thought it was just a good scene between, because it's the only scene that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield really get just the two of them, and it was good. Like, I'm trying to think of the other things I wanted to talk about specifically. I mean,
Matt Murdock is in this movie.
Oh yeah, Matt Murdock is in this movie he's also in Multiverse of Madness. But I think that had been confirmed, right?
I didn't know that, Charlie. I know he's been rumored to be in the She-Hulk show and in the Echo show that is spinning out of the Hawkeye show.
I don't know. I saw him in the Multiverse of Madness kind of preview. You see a flash of him with like the headband over his eyes from the show.
Oh, really? Oh, I guess I have to watch that again.
Or I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I saw that.
Anyway, I knew he wasn't going to have a huge part in the movie, but I would have liked to see a little more of him. But from what
I mean, it was a good moment.
Yeah, I was like, this is amazing. Because
I think somebody made the point that it was just enough to introduce who he is without having him take a part in the movie. Like, it was enough of a cameo. You get that he's a lawyer, he's blind, and he's got supernatural reflexes, and that his name is Matt Murdock, and that's all you really needed to know.
Yeah, I mean, and Spider-Man and Daredevil have like a long-standing friendship in the comics, so it would be awesome if we get a movie with them together at some point.
Yeah, I feel like there will be. I feel especially because of the way this movie ended, with Spider-Man just committing to New York and committing to being Spider-Man. I feel like it's much more likely that he and Matt Murdock are going to do things together in the near future.
Before we finish in the spoilerverse, yes, the movie does kind of descend into extended fan service towards the end with the Spider-Verse stuff, and the villains are like, there's this whole it seems like the conflict could be resolved easily if someone just pushed that button on the box and sent them all back.
Yeah, and especially with the dilemma being somewhat of a false dilemma, because there's nothing proving they won't still die when they get sent back.
Yeah.
Like, I understand, like, that's why I said it kind of like descended, because as soon as Tom Holland goes against Doctor Strange, the plot starts to be a lot more contrived. And again, it's not, and I think I mentioned this before, but like, it's not all bad fan service. Like, a lot of it was like, it was well made, it was good, and like the final confrontation between, Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin and Tom Holland's, Spider-Man, especially after Green Goblin killed Aunt May. Did we mention that it was him? He's the one who killed Aunt May.
Of course it is.
And we didn't talk about the action scenes, but the action scenes were really good. Except for somehow Goblin can produce infinite momentum while he's slamming Spider-Man through floors, because they went through like an entire like 20 floors of a building without losing any momentum. That was a bit weird.
Apparently, Willem Dafoe still does a lot of his own stunts. Like he really is really committed to making it look as real as possible.
Oh yeah, no, like it was amazing, but it was also kind of like a little bit stupid, but like in a comic book way, you know, in a way that wasn't terrible, but also in a way that the MCU kind of doesn't do as much. Like I think somebody mentioned it, and I think it's kind of true. Like some of the fight scenes felt more Sam Raimi-esque, like more like comic book put into movie than the MCU tends to be.
We did get a message from Ben the Movie Buff, and he asked me to read it for us when we got to the Spoilerverse. So, hey guys, Merry Christmas. I hope you are well. I thought Spider-Man No Way Home was a phenomenal piece of work. It was very funny, lots of interesting complications, and so awesome to see all these villains again in the same movie. But without a doubt, it was the scenes with all three Spider-Men, Tobey, Andrew, and Tom, that was the highlight. I could watch a feature-length movie with these three characters just talking in a room about their experiences. But what we got in the movie was still movie magic. It's awesome that the older Spider-Men have to help Tom Holland out when he's down in the dumps. It's even more awesome when they talk about certain things they've done or can do. For example, Tobey's the only one who shoots webs from his wrists. I also adored how Andrew is the only Spider-Man who hasn't fought an enemy from outer space and is hard on himself, but Tobey tells him he's amazing. I think this movie built upon the cool idea that came from Spider-Verse, but this time we all knew these Spider-Men from previous movies, so the interactions by default were very meaningful. I love Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Verse, but this installment is easily the best Spider-Man movie. I can't wait to see what they do next. With much love, Ben the Movie Buff.
There's one last thing I need to touch on before we get into final thoughts. Like we talked about Andrew Garfield's redemption as an actor playing Spider-Man. Can we also talk slightly about him saving MJ when she was about to die exactly the same way Gwen died in Amazing Spider-Man 2?
I thought that was... people cheered when that happened.
I mean, if I would have cheered at a moment, if I didn't think it was extremely rude and stupid, I would have cheered at that moment. But like... that was amazing. And I think, again...
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing Spider-Man.
Like, I didn't even do that one. But like just the like 2 seconds where he like breathes in and takes in the moment after he saves MJ and she just like looks up and says, "Are you okay?" And he just like is barely holding back tears and says, "Yeah." That was just like Andrew Garfield is such a good actor. And like
he is, yeah.
It worked so well. And I thought that was just an amazing little moment to have. There's more things I really enjoyed, especially like, I think not enough people talk about how well Tobey Maguire's character worked for what he was doing, even though he was very different from all the other ones. But it's kind of like, yeah, his Spider-Man was very different from the other two, but still really, I don't know, really cool. And yeah, worked out for this situation, especially with the whole like, you know, when Tom Holland tells them like, "Don't tell me you know how I'm feeling," it was, you know, it was Tobey Maguire who was the first one to talk, and I think that was kind of necessary because both because of the lack of confidence that clearly Andrew Garfield Spider-Man has in himself, but also because like he is the one who knows what to say because he is the one who has the experience and insight to actually be able to speak up there.
So, coming around to final thoughts, Spider-Man No Way Home is, in my opinion, the best live-action Spider-Man movie we've ever had. And it's not fully the credit of this movie that it is as good as it is, because it's really building upon 20 years worth of Spider-Man movies. Like it's almost unfair to compare it to the other ones because it's borrowing the notes, I guess, from the previous movies to help make it as good as it is.
Yeah, I think like it's a very good movie, but it wouldn't be a very good movie if it wasn't for the previous ones. I think. I think that is a fair thing to say that like.
Oh yeah.
I think that this movie did well, but it really would not have worked without the other movies, especially considering that like the best performance by a nautical mile was Willem Dafoe, followed by Alfred Molina. And, I think generally the best parts of this movie were elements from the other ones. Not to say it was a bad movie, but it wouldn't work without the other ones for sure.
Yeah, like if this was the first ever Spider-Man movie franchise and they tried to do this exact story involving the multiverse and other versions of villains, it would not work.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah, if this movie had been what Spider-Verse was, it wouldn't have worked. But because of the other movies, it might work slightly better than Spider-Verse in some aspects. I still think Spider-Verse is a better movie overall for a number of reasons, but this works maybe better as a multiverse movie.
So I will give Spider-Man No Way Home 3.7 out of 4 Bat Cookies. I thought it was amazing, no pun intended. It's probably my favorite movie I've seen in a long time, and I look forward to seeing it again in theaters.
I was more excited about Dune, but for reasons that I would be more excited about Dune, and you would obviously be more excited about this movie. I think a 3.6, like it's higher than a 3.5, but there's just, even though it's like comic book logical problems, like the problems with the movie that makes sense if you use comic book logic, I still think there's enough there to knock it down from a 3.7. I don't think it's that amazing, but it's still a very good, and I think the most entertaining movie I've seen, definitely, if not the best.
And it's leaving me wanting more. I'm really excited to see where they go with Spider-Man from here. So, Spider-Man No Way Home. I'm also looking forward to them stopping putting home in the titles of these movies. It's getting kind of old. The Home trilogy is over, so hopefully they'll stop doing that. But it is playing in theaters. It's doing extremely well.
Spider-Man Home Alone.
Well, that'd be interesting. Crossover. They could do it, kind of. But anyway, it's in theaters now. Go check it out.
A young Peter Parker is making the booby traps, so they also have web in them. Sorry. Yeah. Good movie. Check it out.
So normally we would go inside the Bat Jar to look at our mail, but we don't have any this week.
Well, you read some in the spoilerverse.
That's true. Yes, that's right. We did read some in the spoilerverse. But if you want to get a hold of us like Ben the Movie Buff did, we'll remind you how you can do that.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
And normally, at this point, as we reach the end of the episode, we would be pulling out a topic for next week's discussion. But Hawkeye, the series, has just ended, and I really want to talk about it. So that'll be our next episode.
Is it next week from when this is being released? It's going to be 2 weeks from when this is released, though, isn't it?
I think it'll be 1 week. So holidays are happening. So this episode might come out right after New Year's, or might come out the week after New Year's. I think the way it's working is we're going to do it next week, and then it'll come out right after New Year's. So,
all right.
Everyone, keep your ears to the ground. We'll definitely have an episode in the next 2 weeks about Hawkeye. It'll be on point.
Yeah, you sure it won't be on target?
Maybe.
Maybe that's more Bullseye.
And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
Blech!